So our program tonight is Remembering Fallujah. That will begin with a showing of the film that you've waited so patiently for. Fallujah, A Lost Generation. And then that will be followed by our speakers, who are Ross Caputi, who is the director of the Justice for Fallujah project, a Iraq War Marine veteran, participated in the second siege of Fallujah, and is currently a graduate student in linguistics. Oh, do you know Noam Chomsky? No, excuse me. In linguistics and cognitive science at the University of Pennsylvania. Our other speaker will be someone I haven't seen in a lot of years. In a lot of years. She's a Swarthmore alumni and alum of University of Pennsylvania. Anyway, Dr. Dahlia Wasfi, who was born in the United States to an American Jewish mother and Iraqi Muslim father. As I just mentioned, graduate of Swarthmore College and the University of Pennsylvania with her medical degree. Since 2003 and the U.S. shock and awe invasion of Iraq, Dr. Wasfi has made 2 trips to Iraq, including a 3-month stay in Basra in spring of 2006. And on that note, I would introduce Ross, who will introduce our film.
So the name of the film is Fallujah, A Lost Generation. It was directed by Farhat Amani, who's a French journalist out of Paris right now, but both of his parents are from Fallujah. And he reported from Iraq extensively for the years of the occupation. And I don't know how aware you may be of this or not, but there's a very serious health crisis in Fallujah right now. Something like 1 in 3 children are being born with either cancer and birth defects. It's extremely serious.
Oh my God.
This topic has gotten a certain amount of attention in Europe, but nothing in the United States. It's the media is being completely silent about this. The government's ignoring it, denying it. So Farhat made this documentary to try to get the information out there, and it has gotten quite a bit of acclaim. It won awards at the Al Jazeera Film Festival and other reputable film festivals. Specifically, the documentary is looking into the role that the weapons we used during the sieges of Fallujah may have played in contributing to this health crisis. And it looks into the most recent scientific research on that. So we'll get right into it.
Can I wait before you start? I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, because there are little ones in the room, and this gentleman had asked me about scenes of violence. There is, it's mostly about the little kids, so you'll see deformed children, deformed babies, and stillbirths. But there is, I forgot, there is a scene from March 31st, 2004, when the 4 contractors were killed. And there is another scene of explosions, of buildings exploding. So I just wanted to let everybody be aware of that. So, thank you.
I'd like to reintroduce Dr. Dahlia Wasfi and Ross Caputi. Oh, and plastic cups back.
So I'll keep my remarks brief because actually it's really wonderful for all of you. I know this is really difficult to watch, and I want to thank Bob, who we only met about a month ago, for inviting us to show the documentary here. Thank all of you for being here tonight to take in this information. This was, I remember when this was filmed, this was, I think, in March 2011 is when Farhat interviewed Ross. Looking at the video now, Ross really does look much younger when that video was taken. And we got married a month after, so that's why he looks so much older now. Thank you. But yeah, so
he and I. How you wanted to handle
Yeah, thank you. So we take this dog and pony show on the road, and of course, the interest has gone down on Iraq since the official withdrawal of combat troops. But we still have troops occupying Afghanistan, and people aren't paying, outside of this room, people are not paying attention to that. So we're doing everything we can to keep awareness up and continue to work to end these crimes. So we really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you tonight. My background is, my dad was originally from Basra, Iraq. Basra is in the south. And we lived there when I was little while my father was teaching at Basra University, but my mom was born and raised in New York, actually. So I was born here. I don't even speak Arabic except for a few choice words that my dad used when he was upset. That doesn't count as fluency. So we lived there till I was 5 years old, and then came back here, and I just went about my business and went to school, and yes, I am a Swarthmoron, and then went on to medical school, and then went on to residency training. But I left my training in September 2002, partly because of the build-up to this, for me, was the second attack on Iraq, the first one being 1991. And for the first time I wasn't in school or working, and after the invasion I said, you know what, I'll go see the family, because all of my paternal relatives were still in Iraq. So I went for 3 weeks in 2004, and then 3 months in 2006, and from my times there, just spending that short time under occupation, I really wanted to use all of my my American privilege to try to give my family a voice. And along the way, I also began to work with a lot of the veterans who were coming home, and they had their stories to tell. So those paths kind of merged, and that's how we met as well. So while the attention is down, we really appreciate this opportunity, and my work continues as I'm working on a book that I hope will be finished sometime in the near future. But one of these topics is depleted uranium, and of course now basically what was determined is that in Fallujah there's a possibility that weapons grade enriched uranium was used. So the goal is for Fallujah, for the people of Fallujah, we've based, I don't know how to put it into words what we've done to them, but this may be a permanent genetic alteration that we've done to those people. And actually for the director whose family, or whose parents are originally from Fallujah, he's saying, how do we stop this from happening again? How do we stop these governments from doing this again? And obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is what is in front of us. So thank you for all the organizing you're doing around Lockheed Martin, and continuing to be a voice of sanity in the wilderness of government, especially ours. So.
I guess I'd just like to say a few words about how I see myself as an activist and a veteran before we open things up to question and answers. I get a lot of invitations to speak on the topic of a war, and this is kind of puzzling to me because I don't understand why myself and other veterans are perceived as authorities on the topic of war. I think probably veterans do the most to contribute to Americans thinking this way. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard veterans shoot down people's attempt to question the wars by saying things like, oh, what do you know? You know, if you weren't there, you couldn't possibly know. If you didn't see it, you know, you have no idea what you're talking about. That's really, I don't know, it's just nonsense when they talk like that. I mean, probably the most important thing I could say about my experience as a veteran was just how astoundingly ignorant I was of Iraq, Iraqi culture, Iraqi history, and everything that was happening in Iraq while I was there at the time. I only knew what my chain of command told me, and most of that was lies, or it was highly ideologically distorted. I had very minimal access to the media and the news and stuff like that. I was completely uninformed. I mean, I guess there are some things that only veterans could know about war. You know, maybe I'm one of 2 or 3 people in this room who know what it's like to get shot at, but I mean, that's not very useful information. That's not what I'm here to talk about. The things I've come here to talk to you about are things that I've learned through reading after I got out of the military, from reading the work of unembedded journalists like Dar Jamail, Nir Rosen, Ahmed Mansour, you know, people like them. And this is information anyone can come to have. I just happen to have put in the legwork. And, you know, in starting the Justice for Fallujah project, I really had to do all this research and become an authority on the topic. But I guess I'm saying this because I don't want anyone to treat me as an authority on this topic, or to be intimidated to have an opinion about what happened in Iraq. I mean, just being a veteran, seeing what you see with your own eyes is not enough to have a holistic view about what happened in Iraq. So I want to say that as a disclaimer. And now I guess we can open things up. And John.
Thank you, Dahlia and Ross, for coming out tonight. There were a lot of mentions in this movie about how the war is essentially still going on in several places in Iraq. What would you say to those people who have fallen hook, line, and sinker to the propaganda campaign that the Iraq war is over?
It's really hard to overcome that, and I guess because that's so difficult to overcome, I have emphasized in my work that, you know, this is what we are responsible for. And then there's a whole discussion of, well, people don't like when I say we. A lot of people would prefer that I make the distinction between myself and my government. But believe me, we didn't offer that courtesy to anybody overseas. And I don't think we should expect, especially because of the amount of just us running around saying freedom and democracy all the time. And I realize we don't actually live in a democracy, but when we go running around all over the place saying we do, well, then I gotta take responsibility because they're doing it in my name. So I actually look at it as a positive. That empowers me that, oh, if you want to do it in my name, then I got something to say about it. So, but my drive is to say, you know, if we want national security, we had better examine what we've done to other people. And if what goes around comes around, then we had better do something to make up for what's been done in our name. Unfortunately, we have left behind, of course, there's still the embassy, the largest embassy in the world there that employs several thousand people. And any American embassy anywhere in the world has specifically trained Marines who guard it. And that doesn't count also the number of contractors who are there. So while we are still there in a certain capacity, and Iraqis certainly are aware of that, it's difficult to get people on board for that. But Iraqis themselves are now have to deal with what we've left them. But as long as we continue to raise our voices in terms of what has happened and what is ongoing, I hope that will go a long way towards not making amends, but at least just doing something, and that's something maybe will go a long way.
I have a comment. I think we all need to be on board. There's a huge new war brewing in Syria, okay? And I think, and the war theater now extends basically from the Levant, which is, you know, is northern Mediterranean, Lebanon, and then it goes to the Caspian Basin, AFPAC, it goes to the Persian Gulf, it goes to the Horn of Africa, Somalia, okay, and including Yemen there, and it now goes over the Maghreb, which is Libya, of course, Tunisia, and Egypt. And I think in Libya, I would put money they use the same crap, don't you think? They probably drop this stuff in Libya. They're getting ready to use it in Damascus. That's Obama's next one. I think this is not just, unfortunately, I suspect this is not confined, and you guys have done a great job, but I don't think this is confined to Fallujah now. I think that this stuff, and as I think you, or somebody pointed out about in Yugoslavia.
Right, and that's specifically the depleted uranium. That we know, as documented, is it was used in the first Gulf War in '91, and then all the way through the bombing of southern Iraq in the '90s, and in the invasion of 2003 and beyond, and then Yugoslavia, and then Afghanistan, and on through today, and in Iraq. I have no doubt. I can't prove it. There is suspicion. I think it was on probably Russia Today that I saw a piece that are they using DU in Libya at the time of the NATO assault, and of course it was NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. So I have no doubt it was used in Libya. I expect that they have plans to use it if it's not already being used in Syria.
And a military question, the reason why it's used so much is it's so good, right? Isn't that the problem? I mean, it's such a potent, I mean the downside of it is it pollutes everything, but these guys, Rummy doesn't care, he's not interested in a year from now, right? He wants to, I think he wanted to tap the oil. I mean, it's an amazing weapon in terms of...
Yeah, in a sense it's very effective. I mean, a lot of people have argued, well, it doesn't make sense. Why would they use it in Fallujah? Because it's used for piercing armor and for bunker buses and stuff like that. And in that type of urban combat environment, it doesn't make sense that we would use it because it would just blow through, 30 blocks of buildings and you have a high probability of blue on blue, friendly fire. The thing that was glossed over in the documentary, and Dahlia touched on it a bit, is the enriched uranium. Yeah. Chris Busby, the doctor in this movie, he didn't find depleted uranium in soil and hair samples from Fallujah. He found slightly enriched uranium. And they are finding this in more and more war theaters, like you brought up. They found it in Afghanistan, where they were taking urine samples from civilians who lived near sites that had been bombed, and they found slightly enriched uranium in their urine, and the isotope level in their urine matched that in these bomb craters nearby where they lived. It was also found in Lebanon in 2006 when Israel attacked Lebanon. There was a bombed out ambulance. They bombed another ambulance, and they measured the isotope levels, and it was slightly enriched uranium. So it seems like it's not just the U.S. that uses these weapons, and it's being used in more and more war theaters. Just one comment too about the uranium light. So I'm in radiation oncology at the time, so I deal a lot with radiation. But it's a lot of this uranium is an alpha emitter, so it basically ejects a helium nucleus. So like what you think of it as is kind of like you have a nail. You take a huge sledgehammer. So like the uranium miners, like in New Mexico, when they breathe in the dust, it sits in the lung, and the particles, all the energy's deposited locally. So then you get adenocarcinoma, you get or small cell lung cancer or something, And I think that's why you're getting all these. If it gets deposited in the bone marrow, you're going to get leukemias because all that energy's deposited locally.
And that's how the uranium works. It aerosolizes into microscopic particles. So you're right, it's a very weak radioactive material because they actually use, the big appeal for the military is that it's extraordinarily dense. So if you have like just a tiny bit of it weighs a tremendous amount, and that's what gives it its penetrating abilities. The only thing that's close to the density of depleted uranium is the natural occurring element of tungsten, which is extremely expensive, and we don't have it in here. I think there are some mines that have been located in Russia or one of the, oh, thank you, Azerbaijan, or the former Soviet republics. So, it comes down to money, as most things do. the government has to pay to store this radioactive waste in these silos. So the Pentagon found a use for it, and they don't have to mine tungsten. This is free. And it's very much this generation's Agent Orange, which they also, the Pentagon also said, it's no problem. It's not going to hurt you at all. And of course, to this day, birth defects in Vietnam, and people are still dying of cancers from that. So that's the legacy for this generation.
I just want to say one last thing about the usefulness of depleted uranium. We might actually be dealing with different weapon systems. If it is slightly enriched uranium that's making people sick in Fallujah, it wouldn't have come from depleted uranium weapons. The other possibility that Di Williams mentioned at the end of the documentary is thermobaric weapons. We actually tested out a new thermobaric weapon in Fallujah. It was the first time it was ever used in a combat environment, and it was used to a really great extent. It was a shoulder-fire thermobaric weapon that fires into houses, and the way he described, it sucks all the oxygen out of the house, and then there's this incredible heat blast. So even if it's not, you don't hit the target 100%, it still kills everyone in the house. And for us, this was considered incredible. Before, when you would have to fire 5, 6 rockets into a house, now with this weapon, you would only have to use one. And for the entire 3-4 weeks that this siege lasted, it was really used an incredible amount. So that's another thing that people need to look into.
So where, in your opinion, does the slightly enhanced uranium come from? You said that enhanced uranium doesn't come from the weapon. So where, in your opinion, you must have thought about this, does the uranium come from?
No, I'm sorry. If it's a depleted uranium weapon, then the isotope level that it would leave in the environment, in people's urine and soil and water samples.
I know about that. Yes.
You'd be able to tell from the isotope level that it was a depleted uranium weapon.
Yes,
if it was a different weapon,
yes,
a thermobaric weapon, perhaps if they are using slightly enhanced uranium in the warhead, it would come from that.
So are you saying it's your opinion, it's your guess, that the enhanced uranium is contained in the thermobaric weapon?
Yeah, we don't have real proof of this yet.
We don't. Okay.
Di Williams is one of the researchers looking into this, and on my website I have some of the reports that he's done. He's identified a number of weapon patents that show that they could use uranium or tungsten interchangeably. Also, where we found in battlefields, like I mentioned in Afghanistan, where bombs have been used, and then remarkably people living in that area show up with slightly enriched uranium in their urine, and there's no uranium in the environment that could contribute to that. This is the evidence we have for this right now, but it's not conclusive.
I agree. I read the Afghanistan report. I'd like to ask you one simple question, and your opinion about another thing. The simple question is, 3 Marines have told me that when they went into Fallujah after the first Fallujah attack, they were instructed to destroy all the water towers that they possibly could. And I've gotten 3 different answers as to why that could be. Were you ever told why they were instructed to destroy the water towers?
No, I don't know. I was in the second siege. So that was the first siege.
I just wondered if anybody had told you that. The second thing I want to run by you is this: is that the purpose of using these horrific weapons in Fallujah was not only to defeat the insurgency in Fallujah, but is mainly to terrorize other people later on who might consider opposing the satanic regime of the United States of America. Thank you for the little smile. I'd like to have your opinion on that.
No, I think that's true. Fallujah became a very powerful symbol after the first siege of Fallujah, because the resistance in Fallujah, they won. They kicked the Marines out of the city, and in a sense they didn't completely liberate themselves, but they were the most free city in all of Iraq. I mean, they could operate in their city as they wanted to without American soldiers showing up and telling them how to run their business. This was really inspirational to a lot of people, and this was right at a point in 2004 when different elements of the resistance were kind of uniting. It looked like the Sadr movement and the movement in Fallujah and all the different resistance movements in Iraq were going to unite. And this was going to be very bad for the occupation. It wasn't looking good. And Fallujah was kind of the center of this. So, not just to crush the resistance in Fallujah, but to crush the symbol that they represented as resistance against American empire. I agree that I think that was their goal.
On the water tower, I'm gonna to Bill and then you and then you. Just on the water tower, I don't have any insight on that, and that's the first I've heard of it. But I do know that after the first siege, for either 7 or 10 days, the Marines did not allow the International Red Cross, Red Crescent to enter the city. So I think it was along the same lines of deprive people of water, deprive people of aid, and kill as many people as possible. That would be, and also the psychological effect of that. That would be my guess, my best guess.
I'm what they call a CSO for Disabled American Veterans, and I handle claims that I have to guide through the Veterans Affairs people for kids coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq, although I've done from WW2 right up until now. But what I found interesting and actually horrific is how important it is to our Department of Defense in their push for global hegemony to win at any cost. It's really horrific. I remember 2004 was like a pig in a python. You had the March-April battle on Job, the August battle on the Job, the April assault in Fallujah, and the massive destruction made Dresden look like child's play in November of '04 in Fallujah. And one of the things that we, as people who worked on claims, saw as these people who were so active in these 4 battles in '04 started mustering out in '05, '06, and '07, was a tremendous amount of post-traumatic stress, A, and B, the fear, the worry, the not even wanting to try to have children because they ever knew that DU was being used. And it's a real tragedy to see people afraid, A, to have sex, or B, to be in a procreation because of what they know they were around. But what I found interesting was in 2005, early 2005, we found that those of us who worked at the VA regional office a lot found that Johns Hopkins was offering tests for DU because they wanted to get an empirical base for study of DU. And basically what they were doing was offering urine tests, which was really calibrated ass backwards. You know, they were using like millionths of a milliliter, and when they should be using tenths of a milliliter, and they had another test that worked in exact reverse, and they were it was like they didn't want to find anything. And as time went by, we found out that there was a real reason for this. The typical claim, if it's laid down correctly through the VA regional office, takes 120 to 180 days. That's 4 to 6 months. Now, if you happen to, some kids come home from the war and they throw a lot of shit up against the wall to see what sticks, and the VA responds to that by taking a long time dealing with their claims. If you have a very specific claim, you can get it through in 4 to 6 months. But that guy Doug Rocky in the movie, a lot of you may have seen him at 1501 Cherry Street about 5 or 6 years ago. He travels with a guy named Dennis Kine from Desert Storm. Dennis got really knocked around bad trying to file a claim from Desert Storm. Came to me because he heard about the 80 or so kids that I got through IVAW, successful claims. And we started pushing his claim solely on post-traumatic stress, but had his previous entries dealing with depleted uranium, and they snowballed. It took over 1,000 days to give him a no on his claim. Basically what they're doing, if you go to the Johns Hopkins registry, if you P-form, in other words, you know, you expect 3.5 to 4 years before you get an answer, and the answer is almost always no. You know, if you want to win a claim, if you want treatment, if you want evaluation, and if you want compensation, what the military and our politicians have done to our warriors, it's going to take a really long time. And they pretty much let you know that, you know. File for that, you're done, you know. If you can file a straightaway claim, you can win a straightaway claim. But if you go out there and fool with what they don't want people to know anything about, you're slicing your own neck. And it's a terrible thing that they can have such force over people, that they can totally control people to keep what they need for survival, to keep what they need for their sanity away from them, because they want to push in, they want to open the door, they want to peek in to what is up with depleted uranium.
Yeah, so you were saying basically that it's a sort of a bag between depleted uranium and enriched uranium, and that you're finding sort of enriched uranium in the bloodstream and in the urine of personnel there and here, American soldiers and so forth?
I think the actual, if I understood the science correctly, and I'm not a scientist like Chris Busby is a scientist, but if I understand it, there is a single ratio of natural occurring uranium, and they look at that ratio of the isotopes. There's prevalence of the isotopes, and that ratio is the same everywhere on planet Earth. And what they found was that from the samples, the soil samples, and I think in the hair samples as well, from Fallujah, that this ratio was altered, indicating that the amount of enriched uranium was higher than normal. So this is the indication that uranium was used in the weapons, and now they're having all these birth defects since 2004. Now, there are other cities throughout Iraq that are experiencing increased leukemias and lymphomas, increased general cancers, birth defects. I think Fallujah is unusual because it was targeted so specifically, repeatedly for so long. But there are other cities that are experiencing these increases above normal, but not as severe as Fallujah.
You know, there's one other study that came out, I don't know, maybe a month, 2 months ago, looking at the contribution of lead and mercury. And they looked at Basra and Fallujah, and in both cities, really high levels of lead and mercury in the environment and also in people's bodies. These are all possibilities. We don't know. More studies need to be done. It's very tough to get these studies done. Nobody really wants to take on this issue because it's seen as controversial because the government denies it. Yeah, we just don't know.
The movie talked about white phosphorus being used in Fallujah, and from what I understand, white phosphorus is allowed so long as it's used to light up an area.
Yeah.
But if you're lighting up an area, you're shooting white phosphorus over this area, the people in that area are going to be affected by it. So it's always a weapon, always a weapon.
I wouldn't say it's always a weapon. Like, for example, if they were shooting it way off into the desert to light something up so they can see troop movement or something like that, technically in those circumstances, I think you can argue it's not a war crime.
Then, right?
It's supposed to be legal. If you're not using it offensively, if you're using it just for illumination purposes, then it's then technically it's legal. In Fallujah, though, I mean, first of all the commanders in charge of the siege, they lied. They said there was nobody but combatants in the city. All the civilians had fled to the outskirts, and there was nobody but combatants inside. So they dropped it over the city. That was a lie. There was at least 50,000 civilians still in the city. And also, this is not a precision weapon. It's highly indiscriminate. I mean, it floats down in the wind like this. It covers this really large area of land. So even if they claim they were using it for illumination purposes, I mean, it's irrelevant. It's indiscriminate. There were thousands of civilians in the city, and there was a high probability it was going to hit people. I don't think, however, that this can explain the birth defects that we're seeing. I spoke to a scientist, Tom Fazy. Where's he at?
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. He explained to me the science about white phosphorus. It breaks down very quickly in the environment and really can't explain these birth defects. So I think we can take that option off the table. Ma'am?
Could you just, for me, do the timelines in order and how long it was that each occasion, how long the timelines were?
The different sieges, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. I'll run through the history of Fallujah briefly. So it was in the spring of 2003 that there was the invasion of Iraq, and shortly after the shock and awe campaign ended, troops came for the first time into Fallujah, and they occupied this school building. And people were upset about this because their kids couldn't go to school and they wanted to go about their daily lives. So they protested peacefully outside of the school building. And It's unclear what exactly happened. Journalists on scene say that the soldiers were not fired on. However, the soldiers fired into the crowd. They killed something like 13 civilians, injured something like 40 more. They didn't face any repercussions, nothing was done. They continued to occupy that school building, and 2 days later, same thing happened. They were not fired on, but they fired into the crowd. They killed something like 2 civilians this time and injured another 20 or so. This is considered to be the start of the resistance movement in Fallujah.
And how did they justify that? How did they write that up?
The U.S. military?
Yeah.
They have to justify it too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way they operated.
I mean, they weren't, the U.S. media didn't question them on it. There's only one article that covers it. It's from the Daily Mail in the UK. That's the only source I can find on this anywhere. Nobody knew about it. No, except for Fallujians, nobody really knew that it happened.
But what they say is somebody fired on us. That's how they.
Yeah, they said they heard gunshots, but the journalists on scene said that was nonsense. So I mean, that's considered to be the start of the resistance movement in Fallujah, which is different from other cities in Iraq, because in Baghdad there was resistance right away. In Fallujah they really tried peaceful means first, but they were slaughtered. So after a year went by, and there was kind of a tit-for-tat retaliation between the resistance movement would attack U.S. soldiers would respond with heavier and heavier-handed force, and this escalated until about the spring of 2004, when there was that incident with the Blackwater mercenaries. They were driving through the city, and a resistance band attacked them and killed them, and left the bodies lying in the street. And it was a band of teenagers that dragged the bodies out of the car and beat them and lit the bodies on fire and made this huge spectacle of mutilating the bodies. It was just these like immature kids, which upset a lot of people, even the leadership in Fallujah, the religious leadership, the resistance leadership. They didn't condone this.
It's really no different than the babies.
But the U.S. military used this as a justification for the first siege of Fallujah, which was, I think, first week of May 2004. They cut off all entry and exit to the city, trapping all the civilians inside the city, and they started attacking it in this really indiscriminate manner. They didn't let the Red Cross into the city. They cut off water supply, they cut off electricity supply, and all these things constitute war crimes. It lasted about a week, and in that week, something like 700 civilians were killed. However, the resistance won. The U.S. military had to negotiate a withdrawal out of the city, and they actually turned the city over to the resistance. I mean, they gave it a new name. They called it the Fallujah Brigade, and they appointed some guy to the head of it who the Americans pretended to have a friendly relationship with. This lasted throughout the summer, and although the Fallujah Brigade was in charge of their city and the U.S. military was not allowed inside, they didn't completely liberate themselves, because the U.S. military kept doing airstrikes on the city, and there was really nothing that people in Fallujah could do about it. More and more civilians were killed, and this was right around the period that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi his name started to be mentioned a lot in the news. I don't know if you guys remember that name. Sure. But he was basically the boogeyman that the U.S. media was using to justify. In Iraq. Yeah, he was said to be the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And the really interesting thing about him is there is this like very little evidence of his existence. Everything is hearsay. Everything the U.S. Media would report is unnamed source says Abu Musab Zarqawi claimed responsibility for this bombing here. He claimed responsibility for that bombing here. Allegedly, he was in Fallujah building an army. Nobody in Fallujah claimed that they ever even seen the guy. All the unvetted journalists who would go into Fallujah looking for him never found anything. There was really like no evidence of him in Iraq and Fallujah. And the leadership in Fallujah even put a bounty out on his head. They said if anyone's seen him, then he should be killed. Right around the time of September, October, the U.S. military started saying that they were getting ready to do another siege in Fallujah, and they placed these really absurd conditions for peace on the leadership in Fallujah. They said that the people of Fallujah had to hand over Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, this fictitious character, and they had to turn over all their heavy weapons, and they had to basically stop resisting. The resistance, they were willing to negotiate. They said they would turn over heavy weapons. They said they would allow American soldiers in to patrol the city, but they wanted the Americans to claim responsibility for killing civilians during the bombing raids, and they had a few other conditions that they were calling for. Basically, the United States government, they didn't proceed with the peace talks. They just kind of dismissed it, and in November they went into the second siege of Fallujah, which lasted from about the 8th of November to the end of the month, about 3 weeks long. And in that, it was the estimates of how many people were killed vary between the Red Cross's estimate at about 800 civilians and the Fallujah General Hospital's estimate at 6,000. And about a third of the city was destroyed completely, totally rubbled to the ground. A second third had major structural damage, and the last third had minor damage. Created about 200,000 refugees who just had to go live in the desert or wherever they could survive. And there was about 50,000 civilians who either weren't able to or weren't allowed to leave the city. All military-age males were not allowed to leave the city, whether or not there was any evidence that they were involved with the resistance or not. And the way the siege was conducted was in this completely indiscriminate manner. I mean, first there was this week-long siege of really heavy bombing, and then they sent in ground troops. This is the point where I came into the city to sweep the city, house to house, block to block. We were told that everyone was considered a combatant. We were using kind of these shoot first, ask questions later type tactics, using bulldozers to bulldoze houses, using something called reconnaissance by fire, which is, if you don't know what's in a house, you fire into it. If you hear things after, then there may or may not be people inside. Tactics like these, completely indiscriminate, really blatant war crimes, and this went on for about 3 weeks. After that, Fallujah was kind of turned into an open-air prison of sorts. All residents were allowed back in the city, but they had to undergo retinal scans, and they were given these biometric ID cards, and they couldn't go anywhere in their city without this card. They couldn't enter or leave the city without going through a military checkpoint. And they lived like that basically till the end of the U.S. soldiers left in 2010, arguably not the end of the occupation. And that's where Fallujah is today. John?
With regards to Fallujah, those who were related to the things that happened in Fallujah, who do you want to see in jail?
Our Christmas wish list is...
I mean, anyone who served in the Bush administration is complicit. Anyone working in the Pentagon at that particular point in time is complicit.
Especially Cheney.
Yeah, he's the first, but there's a lot of Eichmanns, in the Pentagon along with them. People who played, complicit roles in the background who are very complicit. I mean, I'm complicit. I took part in war crimes too. I mean, it's not clear to me exactly where to draw the line about who's guilty and who's not. Arguably, the taxpayers are guilty too, because we all have the power to stop this. But certainly the Pentagon and the White House, lock them all up.
I was thinking a lot in terms of while the movie was going on and while the two of you have been speaking about the way in which we still have this sense that it's all quite unintentional. And that was dashed for me many years ago when I first found out about depleted uranium. And Dahlia, I don't know when you were in Swarthmore if you ever heard of the Hasbrooks, the family, the Hasbrooks, and it's kind of a little clan, and that's where Brandywine had its office, as Paul knows, for 25 years in their renovated garage. And they were a couple, extraordinary couple actually. I think they have 14 kids, Beth, or something like that, and all of whom have done great things, and Peggy was kind of the matriarch of Brandywine many years ago, and always getting arrested with us at GE. And anyway, I knew that they had met at Oak Ridge. She was a nurse, and he was a young Army physicist who worked as an aide to General Leslie Groves. For people who know, General Leslie Groves is the military commander or military director of the Manhattan Project. And I knew, and he was always very sort of, he's a Quaker, he just didn't want to talk about things. And he did, on a few occasions, help and give me information on some books that I worked on about the development of the atomic bomb and subsequent nuclear weapons buildup. And, but I never really knew anything else until we used to go out splitting wood, and he's much older than me, and he really could split wood. I'd sit a lot. You know, he, one time we were splitting this log, and he said, go for there, and I said, no, I think we should go for there, and he said, trust me, I worked on the bomb. And it kind of threw me a little bit. You know, why did you all of a sudden say that to me, Kabir? You know what I mean? Why did you say that? And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I lived there. Our office was there. I mean, I happened to say, oh, I understand. And he said, do you know what I did there? And I said, no. And he said, and this was during the build-up to the Gulf War, for Gulf War I. He said, and I've seen it, he said, I see that you had some flyers or reference to depleted uranium. Do you know what I did? And I said, no. And he said, I oversaw the depleted uranium pool, which in the first year of Oak Ridge, there was just thousands of pounds of it, thousands. He spoke in terms of a couple tons. I mean, because it is a very heavy metal. And so I said, oh, and he said, and I'm going to tell you, I think that of all the places I think that it could be used would be Iraq. Empty space, desert, etc., etc. And I said, and of course this was before Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so I said, well, if this is just sort of kind of depleted and thrown, you know, it's being, why do you think that? And he said, Bob, the military doesn't let anything go to waste. He said in 1943, in 1944, one of my jobs was to come up with ways in which depleted uranium could be used. And he said in as early as 45, we were talking about it as a way to add to the ballistic penetration of a missile. And that's what it is. That's what it does. So I was just, you know, somebody you might want to talk with, if you will. But it just, that's when I realized that it is not accidental. There is intention, and the intention is quite institutionalized, etc., etc. You know, we talk about evil. Evil does have a direction and does have an intention.
You know, I wondered if that's why the laws are written the way they are, because genocide, you have to target a specific, I'm paraphrasing, but there's two major factors to defining something as a genocide. Is one, that you target a specific group of people, and two, that you have the intent to destroy them or to significantly affect their existence in the future. So it's very easy to get out of it, to say like, oh, I didn't mean to annihilate them. You know, it just, okay, then it's not a genocide. And to some extent, I think the Pentagon does not know exactly. I'm sure they have a very good idea, but they won't know exactly what their new toys will do until they use them. And there was this gap, and I want to be careful with this because I know there were many military aggressions between Vietnam and Iraq. And at that point, I'm embarrassed to say that I was trying to assimilate and preparing myself to be a good capitalist during my sophomore year, so I was clueless back then. But all the aggressions that the military assaults that I'm familiar with were more covert. The first Gulf War was out in the open, and so this was the first big opportunity in quite a few years for the Pentagon to try out everything that had come out of research and development previously. Same thing with 2003, like Ross mentioned, these thermobaric weapons. So whether the Pentagon could say like, oh well, I didn't really know that this health crisis would result from this, but like that. So you can argue this concept of intent. So intent, it's a really important point to be brought up. Each new war is like a new experiment for the.
Isn't it defined as intent once they find out what the harm is doing, what kind of harm is taking place to people, and they continue to use it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you had mentioned earlier that we need more studies. We need a lot more studies. Iraqis need a lot more studies. But if you look at who controls the majority of monies in this country, that's right, and they're coming from the Pentagon because that's where the most of the tax dollars go. So you have to apply to the Department of Defense to do a research study. I'm sure that's going on at the major universities. So they're not going to fund that because they don't want to know. So it's about the money.
Sorry, I just want to expand on this a bit more, because I mean there's actually a long line of thinking on this in moral philosophy going all the way back to St. Thomas Aquinas, who came up with the theory of the doctrine of double effect. Right. And this is exactly the theory that's used in just war theory to justify collateral damage. Right. And it's the theory that an action can have two effects, a good one and a bad one, and as long as you intend the good one but you don't intend the bad one, it's excusable. And that's exactly how the U.S. military justifies collateral damage in bomb strikes in war and things like that. But in moral philosophy, there are all kinds of things that an individual needs to have in order to be considered a moral agent. One is intentions. The other is the ability to deliberate about your actions. The other is foresight. And for whatever reason, in Western moral philosophy, intentions gets the bulk of the intention. In things like foresight and deliberating about right and wrong and things like that, kind of, they don't get any attention. So, I mean, it's a very peculiar thing about our culture, and it's not right in my opinion. Yes?
I went to an August study.
What you were saying, somebody knows.
Oh yeah.
Maybe the scientists, when they're working on it, don't know. But somebody knows.
Oh, sure.
And then this is inflicting, like, permanent reminder. We've been here, this is what we've done, and this is what you're going to live with. Like the Agent Orange is a permanent reminder.
I think it's also important to note that we may be looking at total disregard for life, by this kind of military machine, because they're not at all unwilling to do this to their own soldiers. And the film makes that very clear. Their own people died first. And some of their, as the man in the film said, the best and brightest. First, because they were in there working with this material. And that was okay. They knew that was at least a risk. And I'm old enough to remember the above-ground tests of nuclear weapons out in New Mexico. Surely someone knew that, that might be harmful, but there were people sitting on bleachers with eclipse glasses watching these things. I come from northern New Hampshire. There's an extraordinary amount of cancer in my family, good American family. And when that started to happen, friends of mine would say, Dorothy, you come from a farm community. What a clean life. What a, why are these people? Why? Mother, father, 3 aunts, 2 uncles. What is this? In the mid-90s, all the data was released, the 50-year window, on nuclear fallout for our own above-ground nuclear tests out in New Mexico. And it turned out that the wind and the weather brought a lot of radiation just up to the point where the White Mountains in New Hampshire rise, and it just dropped right there. 2,500 miles away. You know, and one can say, oh, they didn't know that that would happen. Well, you would have to say that in the same way that you didn't know what would happen to that military crew that was sent out to look at this. Surely they knew it might. You know, they knew that wind and weather works, and they knew that, you know, that the things go from west to east. They knew all that. But it was worth disregarding all those effects to these military people, to American families, to all of it.
My mom served us, I grew up in California, I'm 60, okay? My mom served us powdered milk. She was in Women for Peace. Does anybody remember Women for Peace?
Yes.
We were like the block commies. And our only shelter is peace, I remember that. And we were like the block commies. So, I
could see it in your eyes.
Served, and I hated it, that powdered milk that had that blue tinge, it was awful because the strontium-90, you know,
Yes.
it substitutes for calcium.
Yes.
And my mom knew that, I mean, so clearly people knew.
They knew. And they were
what was
willing
in
to
the
disregard
fallout,
that for their own
The,
people, their own soldiers.
Silent Spring.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
their own people, their own soldiers, not just Iraqis. They were willing to sacrifice American soldiers, American families. So you have to begin to think, this is Dr. Strangelove. You
Well,
know,
it's,
you have to begin to think there is no fair fight. You have to begin to think that war is wrong, don't you?
Generally speaking, it's about corporate profit, you know, whether it's the weapons manufacturers or mercenary companies or any number of security companies. But what came to mind for me, it suddenly clicked for me, was Aaron Brockovich. I mean, that's an American company killing the people in its backyard. If they don't care about that, I know they're not going to care about what happens overseas. And that's providing, well, I don't want to get into an area that I don't know anything about, gas and electricity and all that, but that's supposed to be a normal company. You know, it doesn't. I don't think of Lockheed Martin when I think of like Delmarva Power or one of those. But that's money.
I was a school administrator here in Philadelphia when the 3 Mile Island thing was happening. Oh yeah. There was no school people had not been informed at all about what to do in such a case. We called the parents and said, "Would you like to pick up your children?" Well, that was really effective. But we didn't know what to do. We had no idea what to do. And here's this possibility of a China syndrome 70 miles down the river. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. How much do you fault, let me just put it that way, the media for the lack of coverage for these issues? They can find out.
To me, they're complicit, they're co-conspirators. But if you see, like for example, during the first Gulf War, General Electric owned NBC.
I know, and we're not trying to
So if NBC sells the war on the evening news, then General Electric gets more. Gets more manufacturers. I think that's I mean, and it doesn't. So it doesn't have to be just Fox News.
I think we're going to have to cut it down. People are welcome to stay and talk a little while. Ross, Dahlia, thank you.
Hi, Cindy.